If we don't have a sense of humor, we lack a sense of perspective. Artist Wayne Thiebaud. This is The Artful Painter, art lessons for artists, collectors, and people who love art. Greg Stevens is an artist who delights in painting everyday things. I started following Craig after chancing upon his Instagram account. I was instantly drawn to his small oil paintings of French fries, toy dinosaurs, peanut butter sandwiches, sneakers, hamburgers, and other everyday objects. I knew this was a painter I wanted to talk with. Greg Stevens was born in Sacramento, California in 1963. He received his BA in Art Studio in 1993. During his undergraduate years, he had the privilege of taking classes from Gary Pruner, DeForest, David Hollowell, and Wayne Thiebaud. He began teaching high school art classes in 1996. Now, I'm pretty sure that in high school, I would have loved having Coach Stevens as my art teacher. Greg spent over 20 years teaching high school kids, most of whom had never held a paintbrush intending to paint something realistically. Naturally, they would wonder what to do. This got him started on thinking about what he does when he paints. The result? A new book titled The Beginner's Guide to Oil Painting, Simple Still Life Projects to Help You Master the Basics. Inspired by artist Duane Kiser's Painting a Day practice, Craig has completed a small painting on nearly a daily basis since 2006. When asked why he paints French fries, toy dinosaurs, avocados, or dead astronauts on old paint can lids, he says, "I started to realize that painting could be the whole idea. What you paint doesn't really matter." Thus, he paints whatever is at hand, not because of the object itself, but rather because he is drawn to form. My name is Carl Olson, and this is The Artful Painter. Craig, it's a real pleasure to have you on The Artful Painter. I will confess to our listeners that this is our second go-around. Just for the sake of transparency, I had something happen that hasn't happened in 12 years, and that was I lost a recording. And boy, was it a good conversation.
Well, I'll try and be surprised and keep everything as spontaneous as possible, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, there's no way we can duplicate that one. It was a good conversation. But you know what? Now we're old friends and we can talk.
That's right. Yeah.
And one of the things that drew me to you and reaching out and contacting you was I've been following you on Instagram. You post a painting every day on Instagram, a little, I guess it's like a 6x8-inch oil painting. And sometimes you will have a time lapse that shows the process that's going in there. And I thought, this is amazing. You do this almost every single day or every day. And it's really intriguing.
Yeah. Yeah, I miss a day here or there, you know, because something happened. But sometimes I do 2 posts a day. So I think it is essentially every day. And for all the days I've missed, I've probably posted a couple things on enough days that I get 365 posts a year usually.
I do not post that much, that's for sure. But it is inspiring to watch. In fact, you told me that you were releasing a book, and that's one of the things I'd like to talk about a little bit today. We talked about it in the previous episode, but we're going to do it again. It's a wonderful book. I've looked at a preview of it. It's called The Beginner's Guide to Oil Painting, Simple Still Life Projects to Help You Master the Basics. And I think this is a wonderful approach. It really seems to mirror what you do with your near daily painting. Where did the idea for this book come about? I always think there's a book in somebody, but how was your discovery that there was a book in you revealed?
Well, it's kind of a 2-pronged thing. So I was a high school teacher for many, many years. I started teaching in 1996, and I taught at a continuation high school, which is a school for at-risk high school kids, usually kids who are they're in a single-parent home, or they've gotten in some kind of trouble, maybe either academically or, dare I say, criminally. And I was a commercial sign painter at the time, and my old civics teacher / driver's education teacher had advanced to the point where he was a district assistant superintendent. And he gave me a call out of the blue. He was also a rock climbing partner of mine. And he said, "Hey, we're hiring at this school." And I said,
wait, just one. Now, this is something new. You were a rock climber too. Okay. Inner rock climber school teacher. Go ahead. All right.
And so Bart called me and he said, "Hey, we have an opening at Channa High School." And it was in the district that I went to school in. It was the continuation school. And I said, well, I don't, I was planning on getting my teaching credential, but I don't have it yet. And he said, "No, I'm not concerned about that." He goes, if you get hired, he goes, "We'll get you an emergency credential and you can work on your credential at that point." He goes, "What we're really interested in is someone who has a vocational background in art." And he knew I did hand lettering. I was painting vehicles, and I was painting billboards and things like that. I also had a lot of experience in screen printing signage. He said, we really want a vocational oriented art program. And so I applied, and ironically, my old art teacher from the high school I went to also applied. and after much deliberation, my principal at the time ended up giving me the job.
Oh, wow.
And I loved it. Yeah, she said, I don't think the other guy would be a good fit because he's used to nicer kids. But they were really nice kids. I love them. And I remain good friends to this day with a lot of those kids.
Well, don't you think they can sense that? I mean, I feel like
absolutely.
When I went to school, there was teachers that I was endeared to, that endeared me to them. And there were some I couldn't stand to be in their classes. I hate to say that, but I really couldn't.
No, these kids have an uncanny radar, if you're just tolerating them or if you really enjoy being with them. And I love being with these guys. I'd come up with these lesson plans that I was very proud of, and then they'd just be out the window as soon as I walked into class because there'd be some crisis happening with some kid or, like legitimate crises, something happened with the family or, and we would just have to do something else. And I got to be very flexible. And I got to sort of, I wanted to find out what their interests were because I wanted to do things that would engage them. I couldn't come in and say, "Hey, we're going to learn how to draw this sphere or whatever," because they don't care about that. So I had to really sort of be in tune with what they were hungry for. And little by little, I started developing a teaching style that worked toward them. They have an uncanny ability to know if you're interested in what you're talking about or not too.
Yes.
So I had to have there to be some overlap, right? And I started doing a painting a day in 2006 through Duane Kiser, the guy who sort of put it on the map. I met him at a karate special training for Shotokan karate.
Okay, rock climber, sign painter, school teacher, karate expert. Okay, astronaut is next.
Well, so Duane and I were about the same size and about the same skill level, so we were partnered up with each other, and we just got to talking. I told him I was a high school art teacher. He said, "Oh yeah, I'm a painter as well." And so I Googled him when I got home, and I thought, "Oh wow, painting a day. That's I like his paintings. They're beautifully done." And I thought I was kind of looking for a way to get back to painting from art school, and they were small and manageable. I thought I could carve out an hour a day and do this. And so I started doing that. And as I was doing it, I thought, well, I'm a lot of times I do it at my lunch hour at school, and kids would ask me about it. And I didn't really understand what I was doing or what my process was, but I would imagine their questions while I was painting. They go, "Okay, how would I describe how I'm doing this? How would I really break this down and talk to someone who has zero background about this?" And so I started thinking about that, and then I started sharing it with them and doing classroom demos and getting them started. And I didn't really think of it in terms of a book, but I was thinking of it in terms of teaching it for many, many years. And then through, I guess being in the right place at the right time, starting an Instagram account relatively early and, kind of following through and being proactive and consistent with my posting, I ended up getting a reasonably sizable following. And one of a small publisher saw my work and saw that I had it was kind of geared toward teaching and said, hey, we'd like to contract you to write a book. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have an actual deadline.
The tyranny of the clock. Yeah.
I'd retired from teaching, and I was very happily just sort of painting, whenever I wanted to. And, early in the morning, in the middle of the afternoon, in the evening, whenever my kids we have a couple of kids here, and whenever people didn't need me, I'd be out in the studio painting. But then I said, well, yeah, I talked to the publisher about it, and she was very, very nice, very supportive, and said, look, we'll make this as easy as we can for you. And I worked with her on the outline.
Well, so they reached out to you. Did you had ever thought about the possibility of writing a book before they reached out? Contacted
I
you?
suppose sort of in the back of my mind, I think we all think about things. But for me, there's a difference between thinking about it in the abstract and sort of daydreaming and fantasizing about it. And then the things that you think, yeah, I'm going to do that for sure.
Right.
This was not a for sure thing until someone had asked me. And then I had to really get serious about, coming up with the outline and figuring out precisely how to do it. So
do they define the approach, or do you say, this is how I'm going to approach writing this book? How it'll be organized? There was a bit of a back and forth on that. It's with Page Street Publishing. They're associated with Macmillan, which is a pretty big publisher. They do a lot of how-to books. They do a lot of cookbooks, knitting, crocheting, crafting type things. And it was sort of based on like a cookbook. It was like a series. They said, look, we'll just think of it as a series of projects, almost like recipes. And I said, well, yeah, there's a lot of ways to do this right. I don't want readers to think that there's a set formula on how to do this. And certainly there isn't with painting. There's lots of right ways to do things. But at the same time, there are best practices. There are things that work really well. So she said, just pick 20 to 25 painting projects, maybe come up with a progression of sort of simple to more complex, and then figure out how you would present those. And then that's kind of how we went about it. And I have a couple of good friends of mine. During the height of the pandemic, I met up with them on Zoom, and they were very skeptical and said, well, what do you have to add to the canon of Western art? That's heavy.
And I said, nothing, absolutely nothing. I occupy this very narrow slice of visual arts bandwidth. But here's what I can do. I can take someone who's thought about painting, who's fantasized and had dreams of doing it and maybe dabbled a little, and I can help them come up with a workable routine that would get them reasonably encouraging results, and maybe they would stick with it. I can do that. I can show people how to practice. One way to practice.
How many exercises are there in the book? I forgot the total number.
I think there are 22. I'm looking at it right now. I have all the paintings on my wall. And some of them there's a little bit of gray area because some of them, I think there's 22 paintings, but then there's a couple of just like color mixing exercises I have thrown in as well, where you don't end up with a picture, you end up with a chart. It just shows you what your colors will do when you mix them together, which I think is a pretty important thing to know. So.
Oh yeah, that's fundamental. I mean, that was a good exercise that in there. I appreciate the building block approach. Like you'd give an example. The example would be fun, whimsical, I suppose. If you're doing an avocado that's cut in two or a hamburger or whatever. I thought they were fun subjects, but you took them in such a way that you were addressing maybe 1, 2, or 3 different specific skills or problems that you're going to work to solve. And I thought that was a really brilliant approach to the book.
Oh, thanks. There's so much to painting, and my painting has sort of evolved from that idea. If you look at for some reason, Rembrandt's Night Watch comes to mind. This is a huge painting with multiple figures, architecture. It's got everything in it. what an undertaking that is to paint every part of that canvas so well, including the parts that are not the focal point and are maybe less well painted.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot happening in that painting.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And how do you break that down? The way I broke it down is I took a pear and stuck it on a stage and pointed a single light source at it and thought, well, now I have this little laboratory that shows how a single object interacts with this environment with a single light source. And that's a place to start. That's like a toehold. I stayed on that foothold, and have done many thousands of paintings of single objects. It's sort of an addictive, meditative process that is that even though it's sort of the same, it sort of changes each time.
Did you find that to be a challenge to stop? Okay, wait a minute. If somebody was doing this for the first time, would I remember to tell them they need to think about this?
Right. Well, there is a thing in my teacher training courses, and a lot of teacher training stuff has always struck me as a little silly. But some things are very, very useful. And there's a thing called a task analysis. And that's where you sort of reverse engineer the thing you're trying to teach. You think, well, if I'm going to do this painting, what are exactly all the steps that I'm going to take to do that? And you have to, and you can't assume anything. You can't assume any knowledge on the part of your audience. So you have to really break it down. And you just sort of, as a teacher, you sort of get in the habit of doing that, of just really picking it apart. And I would always have this internal dialogue. What am I doing? How am I doing this? How am I approaching it? Can I assume my students know about this idea? And no, I can't assume that. So it is challenging at first, but once you kind of get into the habit of it from years of teaching, kids that I taught thought they knew a lot, but turned out they didn't.
Well, they're not far different than adults in that respect, are they?
Right. And not to say that we all go into things with yeah. We think we understand things, and certainly we do have some understanding of things, but and they were all different. Some kids actually had quite a high skill level and quite a lot of experience, and other kids had zero. So I had to approach it from, how do I teach the kids who have zero experience, but in a way that is still interesting for the kids who do have some experience? So that was kind of challenging.
How would you do that then? Describe a day in a class where you had a student like that. What would you have done?
Well, for one thing, the subjects are simple. And usually what I would do, I'd always have a bunch of kids that were doing projects independently. They'd be working on screen printing, and I had like 5 different classes. Like I had screen printing, I had hand lettering, letter forms, I had a drawing class, and I had all these classes. But what would end up happening is that any given class, I'd have a variety of kids working on projects from every class. So if I was going to do a painting demo, for instance, I'd just say, hey, I'm going to demo a painting. I have this idea I want to share with you guys. So if you're interested in this, come over to the big work table and let's take this apart. And I'd get half a dozen to 10 kids maybe would gather around.
You appeal to their curiosity.
Yes. Yeah. And maybe it'd be a screen printing demo or a hand lettering demo on a different day or a different period. But for painting, I'd have them gather around. And usually what I'd say is I'd start with some very simple. I'd say, well, so here's what I'm looking at. And it's a pear, it's this form. It's kind of a ball with this conical shape on top. And I would do a very simple layout of that. And I'd say, so this is my drawing. This is my map to where I'm going to put these colors. And then I would just say something basic. How many of you guys know what the color wheel is? And then you go, yeah, we learned that in 2nd or 3rd grade. And I go, okay, what are the primary colors? And someone would know them. And I'd say, well, why are they primary colors? And they'd go, well, what do you mean? I go, well, what makes red a primary color and orange not a primary color? And they most of them wouldn't know, but someone might say, well, because you can't mix orange or you can't mix red with 2 different colors. I say, exactly, right? And so I draw a simple thing, and then I'd say, okay, now these are the principles that all these colors have. They have value, they have intensity, they have temperature, and they have hue. So, and we're going to focus on, and I teach them those, and I said, knowing that, I have to figure out how to match what I see here with the colors I'm going to mix here. And this is the way I'm going to approach it. And it was the simplest of strategies, mixing lots of complementary pairs, makes your color a little darker, also desaturates it. What a great idea. Super useful tool. It's not a complicated strategy, but it works well. And then you can tweak it. You can go near complementary mixes and et cetera. And kids would really respond to that. A lot of them would start painting along with me, or they'd think, oh, I'm going to take that, I'm going to apply it to this subject. And we had a lot of fun kind of mixing things up and sharing ideas.
I think my art class would have been a lot more interesting if my teacher had taken that approach. Of course, the curricula was set by the county that I lived. So it was art history, art appreciation, but not technique. We didn't do anything.
Yeah. And I would show them slides. I'd say, hey, here's a painter who did this really well. And I'd show them pictures or pull out a book or something off the shelf and say, like, I'm going to do this, but here's how another artist did the similar thing. Look at these colors here, and it kind of started to build upon itself. And of course, some kids got super into it. Some kids did one or two paintings, and then they completely switched gear to something else. Yeah. And that's totally fine. So, well,
they've got a beautiful cross-pollination of different disciplines. I would have loved to have learned screen printing and lettering and those things. Had those things been offered to me when I was in high school, I would have loved it.
Yeah.
We did have a drafting class, and I took that for as long as I could. I enjoyed that.
Yeah, same here.
I loved that class. That was before AutoCAD. AutoCAD was...
That's right.
Obviously, oh my goodness. The only computers around was an IBM 370 or something like that, mainframe.
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's really neat to hear how you were appealing to students there. But those same principles can apply to anyone that wants to learn to paint, and I think your book accomplishes that. One of my favorite features of your book, it's like you're analyzing a problem and solving it, helping us solve that problem.
Well, and I wanted to go to there are a lot of approaches to take to painting. Yeah. This is an alla prima approach, which is you doing it all in one sitting, painting wet on top of wet or adjacent to wet. There's no drying time. There's no second pass. So that it's a very specific type of painting. We're not doing any glazing. It's a very simple, direct approach to painting and to achieving something that's close to what you want to achieve. If everybody imagines what they want to paint, and then if what they end up painting is very far off away from what they imagined, it can be discouraging. But the closer you get your idea to be with your reality, I think the more you're going to be likely to try it again.
Well, in your book, you made an outstanding statement. You said the ability to judge precisely what needs adjustment in a painting is exactly the skill that has to be developed to paint well.
Yes, yeah.
That could have been the whole book right there.
No one's going to buy it, Carl.
No, I know. I buy the book.
Well, when I was in art school, I got my UC Davis jacket. I went to UC Davis. We had some famous artists working there at the time, and we had this one criticism class where the instructions were you need to have 4 paintings by the end of the quarter. 3 small ones, and a small one was like 20 by 30 inches, and a big one was like 4 by 6 feet. And then he just said, okay, the studio's open during these periods, come in and work on it. And then we're going to meet at the end and we're going to critique each other's paintings for a week or whatever. And so everybody's feverishly working on these things. Some people knocked them in the last week, and you could tell. And man, they were these brutal sessions. The class started in the evening, like at 5 p.m, and literally went till like 1 or 2 a.m. And people would be like punch drunk with sleep. And, it was a bunch of young college kids. And I was a little bit older. I was in my early 20s. And, people would be mean and it was nasty. And people would be defended. A couple of people ended up crying. And I know what we were trying to figure out now, looking back. If you look at a painting and you see the challenges that painter had, and you think, okay, well, here's what they're trying to achieve, but here's what they did achieve. So maybe here's some areas where they succeeded, and here's some areas where they fell short. And you get in the habit of doing that with other paintings. You think, well, how would I have handled that? And how does this not quite match up with what their stated goal is? Then you start to figure out like just the nuts and bolts of, that area needs to be darker, or that area needs to be a different shape, or you got to de-emphasize this area. That's what it was supposed to be. But everyone would be so tired and cranky that it ended up becoming, everyone's defensive. And it was a lot of fun, but it was not for the faint of heart, for sure.
So who was the instructor?
A guy named Dave Hollowell, who was a ridiculously good painter, knows ton about color theory, does these beautiful pastel paintings. He was great. And he was just trying to like keep us on track.
So let me get the right picture. So it wasn't him being brutal. It was each class member criticizing others. Yeah, it was a big group critique. And Hollowell would, at one point somebody came on and he said, oh, my grandmother just passed away and I was feeling very emotionally vulnerable when he did these paintings. And he just started sobbing. It was tragic. And he just said, look, I'm a painter and I'm qualified to help you make your paintings better. And I hope that you work things out with your family, but I'm not qualified to help you with that right now. So let's just talk about your paintings. And I thought that was such a great response. It was therapeutic in a lot of ways. And like I said, we were all young and sort of ego driven and defensive about what we were doing. And that made it tough. And you had to kind of let that go and just say, it's not the greatest painting in the world. And I'd like to have some insight on how to make it better. Do you remember your paintings that were in that critique?
Oh, they were wretched. Yeah, I think they were still lifes, but they were mostly from imagination, and they were based on the novels of Dashiell Hammett's and Raymond Chandler, these sort of dark film noir still lives. And I had done a series of woodcut prints that were also based on the same images. And the woodcuts they were very much more well received by my fellow classmates. The paintings were not good.
You still have them?
Oh gosh, no. There might be one or two floating around at friends or relatives' houses, but I don't know where they are.
So they did leave your possession.
Oh yes, yeah. And some of them got painted over and chopped up into smaller panels, So
yeah. I still have the first painting I ever did. My wife framed it and put it in an office. I told her, you can frame it and hang it, but it can't be where anybody can go and easily see it.
I have the first oil painting I ever did. It's a portrait of Richard Nixon.
Get out.
Yeah, I did it in the 8th grade. It's in my shop.
Oh, wow. Well, that's neat that you have it.
I have a bunch of sketchbooks, and I have sketchbooks from way, way back. And even if I look at my old blog or I look at my Instagram account, it's like, oh my gosh, my progress is glacially slow. But it takes me a long time to explore an idea. So, what are you going to do?
Yeah. You mentioned your subject matter for your paintings that were in that critique. They sound a little heavy, and it seems like that's what sometimes we get hung up with, the idea that everything's got to be heavy. There's got to be some symbolism or some heavy social justice thing being in the painting.
It's got to be important. Got to be important.
Tap
into the zeitgeist.
And here you are, you're painting avocados. And I love it.
Well, when you paint something every day and when you commit to doing that, you're sort of always on the hunt for something to paint. And the thing that you're going to paint, the thing that's going to be the most engaging is the thing that looks the coolest to you. It's going to be the thing that you go, I like that. The local color on that has some appeal to it. I like the way the light is striking that form. The shadows that are playing across the surface make some interesting shapes. I like the reflective quality, the surface quality of something. So that has to spark something in you. And sometimes there's nothing. You're just like, oh my God, it's almost the end of the day and I haven't painted anything. And I made a commitment on my blog or my Instagram account to do it. And you just feel sort of beholden to the 5 people who are following you on social media. And so you just grab whatever. Or that's what I would end up doing a lot of times. And I would think, oh my God, I don't really want to paint this thing that I grabbed, a child's toy or whatever. But within just a couple of minutes of painting and concentrating and looking at it, I would sort of turn off that part of my brain that would judge the object's worthiness. And I would find something interesting. I think, yeah, I like the shape of the cast shadow, or I like the warm light reflecting on the shadowed side, something you'd find. And then you just sort of, I would lose myself in it. I realized after a while that the painting has less to do with the painting, the subject of the painting, and more to do with sort of your frame of mind at the time that you're painting it. And certainly you always do your best, but from day to day, your best varies, depending on what else is going on. And you got to be kind of okay with that. Almost always there's something about the painting, even the ones that were abject failures, where you'd say, well, at the very least, I figured something out about this process or about the idea of seeing, in this painting. And I just post them all. People can judge for themselves if it's successful or not successful. And, I think that's important for people to see ones that are like, and ones that are like, oh, that came out nice.
Well, those paintings, you sell them as well, and people enjoy having them go into their collections.
Yeah. Well, and this takes me back to art school. I was as an undergraduate at Davis, I was a few years older, and so I ended up being good friends with a lot of graduate students. And at one point, I needed a place to do a 20-foot banner for a local newspaper. And the graduate studios had this nice long hallway. And so I talked to a friend of mine. I said, hey, can I tack this banner up and paint it? I was like, yeah, I don't care. So I tacked it up in the hallway, and I would chat with the other artists in there, and I just painted this banner. And one of the faculty members came in, and she gave everyone a hard time. They said, I can't believe you're allowing someone to come in here and taint this sacred space of art making with this commercial endeavor. And she said it sort of tongue in cheek, but she said it and she was kind of serious. And I thought, I know it's a sign and it's letters, but it's shapes, it's colors. And, and then when I started doing paintings every boxes full of these little paintings, or do I just want to let them go out into the world? If someone's going to enjoy it on their kitchen wall, that's great. I don't need to have it hanging around. It's hard to imagine a time when art didn't have a commercial component. All the great Renaissance painters all had patrons. The church commissioned a ton of stuff. It was all intertwined with commerce. People have to eat,
Exactly. And materials cost money.
Absolutely.
So I think this is true of any, sometimes it starts off as a hobby. Hobbyists want to figure out, how do I fund this hobby? And then so that I can keep it going, and then it becomes a profession as a result. But they still remain amateurs in the sense that they love what they're doing, but the commerce aspects helps them to continue to do what they love to do. So, yeah, I did a 30-day challenge. I'll probably never do another one because it nearly killed me. I got the flu during that time. This was about
Oh
4 years
man.
ago. But you know what? It was still an instructive process. I can just remember I just had that flu and I was about to collapse, and I just took a child's block and just set it on the table and just painted it.
Yeah.
So I did 30 paintings in 30 days, and I sold 20 of them.
Yeah. That's
You know,
great.
so well, good. It paid for the paint and the materials that
Right.
I used.
Right.
The other 10, I'm glad they didn't. So that might have been when I had that 103 degree fever at
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
time. It was very
No, you know,
expressionist.
and that kind of painting it's certainly not for everyone.
No.
There's a lot to be said about spending more time with the painting, doing a bigger piece that you simply can't finish in one sitting, considering a piece over the course of, a number of days or weeks or months or whatever. That sort of consideration is also a wonderful way to work and to paint. And, I've just found that doing small pieces, it just suits my disposition really well. It reminds me of a thing that Elvis Costello said. He said, someone was saying, your songs are like 2.5 minutes long, and how does that, how do you put that in context of like, Western music? And he said, well, you have symphonies and operas and you have all this stuff. And then you have the 2.5 minute pop song. And he goes, I want to make the best 2.5 minute pop song I can. And he probably did. I mean, Elvis Costello is a genius, in my opinion. So, that there's lots of different ways to work in a given medium. So
one of the things I think about your paintings, you mentioned that they're small. I guess they're like 6x8 paintings.
yeah,
typically.
5x7 is a pretty common size. 6x8, 5x7, 7x7, usually around between 40 to 50 square inches. And I realized early on that I was going to be selling them, and I thought, well, what are the standard sizes that people can easily buy frames for?
Exactly.
And so that's why 5x7 and 6x8 are, they're standard. They're easy to get, inexpensive, nice looking frames. So
do you ever think about going larger on occasion?
I do, and I have. I had a show in town in Sacramento 2 or 3 years ago. And I think the biggest thing I did was maybe 18 by 24. I did a couple of odd shaped ones like 12 by 36. I was painting a bunch of old tools at the time. So occasionally I paint, larger, but they're still relatively small to maybe medium-sized paintings. I like to work on something for a day or two or even 3, and then just be done with it. It's hard for me to sort of maintain the energy necessary to carry through a larger piece like that. And I have done a series of paintings that have 4 or 5 or 6 objects, but those are still relatively small.
Well, those are interesting. I was looking at your website when a while back. You have these, you've got your still lifes that are single subject, but you have your arrangements. This eclectic collection of things makes a compelling composition.
I sort of like the idea of anytime you put more than one thing on a canvas, it creates a narrative, whether you intended to or not. People are going to think, well, why is that toy dinosaur next to that lemon? And I like that. I like that aspect of painting and arranging things and pulling different ideas in. And it doesn't have anything to do with me. I don't make up a story when I'm putting it together. I'm looking for things that work well to me visually together. So I'm looking for things that have a certain aesthetic appeal. The composition has a certain flow or a certain kind of stability that appeals to me, but there's no story other than what people would bring to it from their own lives.
One of the things that intrigued me about your paintings, I noticed on Instagram, it was the first place I saw it, you would complete a painting and then there would be color swatches on the painting. What was the purpose of doing that? I thought it was very intriguing to see.
Right. And I still do that on occasion. Sometimes it just seems like a painting needs it. But I first started doing it in my sketchbook because I often work with a very, very limited palette, just 3 primaries plus white. But I have a lot of different options for my primaries. For red, I've got alizarin crimson. I've got, cad red light, medium, and deep, vermilion. There's a variety of reds I could use. And I would do something and I think, well, I like this idea. And so for a while I was writing down, oh, it's this color and this color and this color. And then I thought, I don't have time to do that. Or maybe the whole sketchbook page was covered with oil paint and I couldn't write on it. So I would just take a little blob on my knife and just stick them across the top or across the bottom, because I can tell what color it is if I see a pure swatch of it. So I would just put those on as like little notes of what my palette was at the time. And I thought, what? I like that idea. I like what it adds to the composition. It sort of draws attention to the surface. But I also like the fact that it's drawing attention to what the painting is made out of. And I just thought it was interesting. And so I started putting it on some finished paintings. I still do that sometimes.
What it reminds me of is there are certain works of art, visual works of art, that have artifacts. You look at some of the moon landing photos, there would be the registration marks that were in the photos.
Right.
I love seeing that.
Yeah.
Or the overprinted negative where you see the sprocket or the numbering of the film, what the film type was and that sort of thing. I always liked seeing that little artifact within that visual image. And so it's like you're doing that.
Well, there's a group of painters from the Slade School in England, and one of their older members of that group of painters is, I'm going to butcher his name, Juan Uglo, I think. Uglo. I'm not sure how to say his name. It's UAN something like that. Anyway, British painter, very good, and he had a very meticulous way of measuring his drawing. Lots of little grid marks. And those would end up showing through on his finished pieces. And they're very interesting. The legend had it that his painting method was so meticulous and took so long. Like he'd start off painting a piece of fruit, and over the course of weeks, it would settle as it started to decompose. But he still had these really meticulous marks, and maybe he'd do a figurative piece that would take him years to complete, and he'd have the same model come back and assume the same pose. And I just liked the fact that you could still see parts of the beginning of the painting in this painting. They're beautiful, beautifully done. Colors that are kind of startling to me that I wouldn't think of using. That's what I like about painting. Seeing a painter's palette. I think, well, there's a novel color that I would never mix that color on my own. I've never incorporated that way. We all sort of gravitate toward things, and it's so interesting and surprising to see just the colors that people incorporate into their work. Lots of different ways to get things done,
It is. Sometimes I went through this process too, and sometimes still fight it. You think about, okay, what tubes of color am I going to own and use? And then it's almost like, well, maybe today I want to use cad red light as my base red, like you were mentioning, or maybe it's going to be something alizarin crimson or something like that. So, because there's a key to that color,
Right.
color scheme there. So it may be cool, it may be warm, it may go toward the teal, it may go toward the orange, to borrow the Hollywood color grading system. It's kind of hard to say. I'm just going to only use these three primaries because I may want to shift them a little bit. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, the sort of the color system that's in my book is like a split primary palette. So I take one of each primary, a warm version and a cool version. And that doesn't mean I use those colors in every painting. I don't put all 6 versions, sometimes I might. But usually I think, well, mostly this is going to be warm, or I don't really, I'll think, well, I don't really need a really vibrant green. So I can use cobalt blue and cad yellow medium, because that's going to make a pretty muted green if I happen to use a green at all. But in an avocado, I'm going to probably go with cerulean blue and cad yellow light, because they're going to make a punchier, more vibrant, yellow green. Those are what I do. I don't use a lot of earth tones, but when I do, sometimes out of convenience, I'll use yellow ochre. Sometimes that's the only yellow I have in my palette. Or I'll use a transparent red oxide, will be the only red I have. It's a very earthy red. But a lot of times I just use brighter primaries. And I do what a teacher of mine used to say. He said, you're making cheap colors out of those expensive colors. Because you can mix a nice yellow ochre, but you're going to be using a lot of cadmiums and cobalt, and you're using all these things that are very pricey, when you could just say, well, I'm just going to start with the yellow ochre.
Yeah, there's a reason why they're called convenience colors, and that makes sense. Yeah. Now I got to talk a little bit of shop here. What kind of paints are you using?
So I have lots of different brands, but I've sort of gravitated toward Lucas 1862 oil colors. And I have a couple of just really practical reasons for that. Number one, every color they make comes in a 200 milliliter tube. There's an economy of scale there when you buy the bigger tubes of paint. They last longer, they're less expensive because you're buying more paint. So that's number one. And not every manufacturer makes big tubes like that. The second thing I like a lot about them, of all the oil colors I've ever used, they dry the fastest.
Do they have some kind of additive to do that, or is it just?
I don't know. I haven't really researched that. I have read on their website that they do have a little faster drying time. So I suspect that they have formulated them to dry a little bit faster. And I do a fair amount of commission work, and not all the time, but sometimes I get commissions that are time sensitive. Someone wants, especially around the holidays, I do a lot of people want to get a gift for someone, and they pile up. I've got to get them out the door by a certain time to get them to people in time for Christmas, or someone will contact me. They have a short turnaround time. And so these things they dry probably, it's hard to quantify it, but probably twice as fast as most other brands of paint. Certain passages on my palette will be dry overnight. Thin stuff will be dry the next day. It's
almost like it has an alkyd. It's an alkyd-based paint, perhaps. I don't know. I don't know anything about it.
It's not quite that, because I have used alkyds. Yeah. I had a bunch of alkyd that was given to me, and I had a bunch of white alkyd. So I could use that. It mixed well with other colors, but because the white has an alkyd base, it made everything dry faster. And that stuff dries very, very fast, definitely dry by the next day in most cases. So it's not quite that fast, but some things will dry as fast as one day, and most things will be dry in a week, obviously depending on how thick it is. So I like that. And I also like the saturation. I like the vibrancy of the colors. A lot of people look at my paintings and go, oh, a lot of your things aren't that bright. But if I wanted them to be, I could make them pretty bright. I like earth tones, and I like more muted colors. I mean, most things are kind of grayed out that we see in real life. And if you do that and you save your more vibrant passages for something you want to be really punched up, you leave a little bit of room for that kind of thing. But yeah, I like the variety of colors. I like how bright they are. I like the drying time, and I like the big tubes. So,
well, what's the consistency? Is it thick, thin, buttery?
It's pretty thick.
Yeah.
They're not like a lot of student grade paints will be very homogeneous. like one color is the similar consistency to another. So they're not like that. They're professional grade paint. So some of them are you got to almost shake the tubes because they'll be kind of, they have a lot of oil, not quite mixed in, but it's a very thick, kind of buttery texture. Titanium white is almost always well mixed. The cadmiums, you got to do a lot of shaking. Sometimes I store them upside down, cap down, right, so that the pigment will sort of settle on the business end of the tube. And so another thing I do is I have a lot of these things sitting around my studio. I say cardboard, and I'll just put blobs of paint on cardboard, and you can see the oil slicks around them. The cardboard will absorb a lot of the excess oil. You let it sit for a couple hours, then you can scrape it off and put it on the palette, and it makes the consistency a little bit stiffer, which I like. So,
do you use any mediums?
I do not. Unless I am working against a deadline, then I'll use a little bit of liquid, and that speeds up the drying time.
Sure. Yeah.
So
keeping it simple.
Yes. Oh, yeah.
Makes it easier. You mentioned you do commissions. So is it the same type of subject matter, or is it something different?
Typically people will see the stuff that's very popular. This people really like hamburgers. They like peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. They like packs of cigarettes. And I think these are objects or items that people have an emotional connection with. French fries are big, and I can't paint French fries. I couldn't paint enough McDonald's fries to meet demand. And I would get kind of bored. I would and I wouldn't. I like the idea of being able to change it up and do whatever I want from day to day. But every now and then I'll paint some French fries and they'll sell like that, right? They sell right away. And then I get a bunch of requests like, "Oh, do you have any more?" And I said, "No, sorry about that." "Well, would you paint one for me?" And I'll say, "Yeah, I can do it. It's 3 or 4 week turnaround time, or whatever my turnaround time is." It costs a little bit more because I have to fit it into my schedule. And also, it might not be a thing that I'm just like really dying to paint at the moment. So, I need some impetus to get on it. But once I start, it's fun, So usually there are things like that people see a thing and they want that thing, but there's none available because it's a popular thing. So.
Do you suppose it appeals to a sense of nostalgia?
Yes. Yeah. And when I paint French fries, I just like the architecture of French fries.
I like eating French fries. That's my problem.
Well, they have this square cross section.
Of course.
It's this beautiful sort of warm, yellow to amber color. The way the light hit, the great reflected lights, the bag, especially the small fries. I really like painting small fries. That kind of white paper bag with the brightly colored, McDonald's logo on it is just, it's just fun. You have the inside of the bag, the outside of the bag. There's a lot of stuff going on that's pretty interesting and fun to paint and arrange. So
that's interesting that you do the commissions. Now, there is one other thing that I think that was interesting and intriguing to me, because I would have never in a million years thought of doing this, is the paint cans. You're taking paint cans and painting on those and selling that. Where did that idea come from?
Oh, yeah. Well,
the paint can lids is what I should have said. I kept saying,
yes,
but
yeah,
it's the lids.
Well, when I was teaching, we couldn't. Most of the painting I did in my classroom was acrylic painting, and the paints that I liked the best were called artistic acrylic colors or something like that. And they were designed. They came in gallon cans. And they were very liquid, but a very high pigment content. And they were designed specifically for painting stage backdrops and murals. And when I was a sign painter, I used them all the time for mural work. And they were relatively inexpensive. But like I said, a lot of pigment. So it went a long way. So I started buying them by the gallon and using them in my classroom. I would pour them into like a 16-ounce squeeze bottle, and that's what we used. That's what we worked with. And we went through a lot of them. And junk would it wasn't junk. It was stuff that I thought was visually interesting or might have a use down the road. as a high school art teacher in a small district, you learn to repurpose stuff. And I just started saving these paint can lids. I didn't know what for, but they were all a different color. You know, you'd have the yellow ochre one, you'd have the bright yellow, a couple of different shades of green. It would be whatever color was in the paint. I just had a box full of them. And then one day I was sitting talking to some kids, you know, holding court, whatever we're talking about. Some kid was going to probably have their meeting with their probation officer or whatever we're talking. And a kid was sitting in profile right next to me. And I just started, there was a paint can lid sitting right there. And I just sort of started doodling. And I painted his ear. And I was just sort of doodling around. And kids started looking at it and going, that's Ryan's ear. And I said, yeah, I'm, you know, it's kind of a nice surface to paint on. It was like on a purple background, I think. But it was it was a very heavy acrylic, matte acrylic ground. I thought, this is a wonderful surface to paint on. And I ended up putting that in an assemblage. It was ended up being a part of a bigger painting, a bigger piece that I did where I attached some other things to something. And I just started saving lids. And I thought, I would paint like features like a nose or a mouth or different things I would paint on, or a brain. I did some medical paintings. And eventually I sort of gravitated toward painting skulls on them. Not maybe a little bit of a sense of the macabre, but you know, skulls are great objects. Most of the things I paint are very simple and they're very easy to draw. But drawing is an important skill, and a skull is a difficult thing to draw. There's just a lot more going on in that. And I thought, these are kind of cool. So I started painting skulls on them, and then I started putting those on eBay. And here's the rule of painting: is that if you think it's engaging, there are going to be a lot of like-minded people in the world that also think it's engaging. And so I try not to second guess that. And they would get bid up and sell out right away. And so last October, I did a thing. I did Skulltober. I have a couple of friends who are, you know, handymen or commercial, you know, like residential commercial painters. And so they just saved their lids. And I had a customer who said, yeah, I'm in interior design. And she was in Mill Valley or someplace in the Bay Area. And she just mailed me a bag full of lids. And then she ended up buying a bunch of the finished product. So for the entire month of October, I painted one every day. And I think only 2 or 3 didn't sell. And occasionally I do them, just throw them in there just because they're fun. Sometimes they'll be in grayscale. Sometimes they're leftover paint on my palette. Again, they're really fun to do, and they're different every time.
I think you have a demo on YouTube that's a skull in a spacesuit helmet.
Oh yeah. I got into that. You know, the astronauts are cool. Skulls are cool. I like science fiction. I like sort of pulp fiction art, sort of old paperback covers.
Oh, me too, man. All right.
Yeah, I got a big collection of comic books. You know, Silver Age Marvel comics, and I just, you know, sometimes there is a narrative. And I just thought, you know, those early astronauts, Mercury, early Apollo astronauts, early cosmonauts, you know, none of that stuff was ever a sure thing.
No.
And I've had viewers on Instagram point out, well, it's space. There's no atmosphere. They would never rot away to nothing. Like, I don't know the science of decomposition in space or whatever, but it was just sort of more symbolic of how dangerous the job of being an astronaut is. Also, I'm a big fan of James Gurney and his whole idea of imaginative realism. And I started taking things from different references. Like I'd take like an old spacesuit from an old 1960s Russian cosmonaut shot. And then I would set up a skull model on my stage that was sort of the same angle and same lighting of the astronaut inside that suit. And I would carefully sketch out the suit and just do a real rough sort of rendering of the astronaut's face, like little cross marks where the eyes and the nose were. And I'd go, okay, now I'm going to look at the skull and draw that in, and then just put this together, because I thought it was an interesting narrative content. It was just kind of a opportunity to play with some different ideas. And it's really fun, and I'm not anywhere near done doing them. I haven't done one in a while, but maybe I'll do one this week because you got me thinking about it again.
Well, I'm
So,
glad I could be something of an inspiration.
oh yeah, I revisit things that I've painted all the time. I'm just drawn to certain forms and certain color combinations, and
You
that's
know,
another thing I had to realize. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, there's this idea of creative momentum, right? And if you get in the habit of working in your sketchbook or doing small studies every day or a finished painting every day, you just it's like going down a hill. Like you pick up speed, and each idea leads to a dozen different ideas, and you just get this backlog of a list of things to try and do. And I think the more you do, the more ideas you get. And to me, and there have been times when it's normally like more of a lack of motivation. And I found in those times, if I just say, I'm in my kitchen and I go, my wife just made guacamole, grab empty avocado husk. That's handy. Throw it on the stage. I'm just going to paint it. And those end up being really beautiful paintings, I think. You take something that would just be garbage, and that's why I started doing cigarette packs. My delinquent high school kids, I'd say, hey, anyone have a empty soft pack, Marlboro soft pack? Oh yeah, I got one of those, Stevens. I had a box that had all these empty cigarette packs, and they were crumpled and beat up, and the cellophane was shiny. And then a kid would say, hey, I got a couple of live ones you can stick in there. And I'm like, I'd probably not in the classroom. Thank you, though. And my principal would come by and then kind of give me the side eye, and I'd be like, yeah, it's a class project. And you take things that it's a thing that would be discarded, yet people have connections to things that are discarded. And you're right, there was a sense of nostalgia about those things, and those are things that would get you going. Just I'm going to buckle down. I'm going to paint the first thing I set eyes on, and that's going to get me through this lack of motivation. And every time it works. You find something interesting that pulls you into it, and then you're back on, so.
I think that's one of the things, or one of the innovations that I enjoyed learning about with the Ashcan School of Artists, is how they had that journalistic approach to painting.
Oh yeah,
just everyday things, everyday life. It wasn't necessarily pretty things, but they were things. And by virtue of being painted, somehow or another, they became beautiful.
Right. And the idea of pretty, again, that's a narrow range of things that fall under interesting, right?
Yes.
And some things that are pretty are not that interesting. So, but some things are. It's engaging, I think, is a better word.
Maybe that's it. That is it. Yeah, engaging.
So yeah, I look around the shelves I have in here, and I have a variety of old bottles. I have cans of ruined paintbrushes, children's toys, like little toy figures,
Yeah.
Old tools.
Have you ever had a desire to do outdoor painting or paint a landscape?
Yeah, and actually that's the thing I've been exploring lately in gouache. My my attention span is not long, and I like to be able to finish in an hour or so. And I found that gouache is pretty suitable for that. It dries fast. I can get ideas down quickly. I'm older for a father of young kids. I'm 58. I have a 7.5-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl. And so they kind of keep me tethered to the house when they're around. But I live in the woods. I have a couple of acres. And as the weather gets better, I just want to go post up with a little outdoor easel and just paint the stuff that's around my house. But lately what I've been doing is I just take my phone and I just snap off pictures on the way to school when I'm driving them to school. So a lot of the little things I do are like from the road or in the parking lot, and I'll just do them at the kitchen table. When my wife will be teaching out in another building we have, and I'll have to be in the house with the kids. My daughter only has preschool 3 days a week, and she doesn't always want to come out to the studio, and I can't oil paint inside because it's kind of smelly.
Sure.
But the gouache is great, and I have really been painting. Space is different from painting volume. When you paint a thing, it's a different idea than painting space, right? I mean, there's space involved in a still life, but it's usually a very, confined space. It's a different kind of thing. It's a different idea, and it's really changing how I look at a lot of things. So, and I mean, certainly in landscapes, there are things. If there's a car or a house or a water tank that has volume, but you have to put it, you have to incorporate it in the atmosphere and the space, so.
Yeah, there's a huge sense of scale and atmosphere and light.
There are lots of different elements that you have no control over. Whereas with my still life setup, I control everything.
Right. Well, I tell you what, Craig, there's so much more I could talk to you about. There's a lot of experiences, I'm sure, and stories that you have from your wealth of experience as an artist and as a teacher, a sign painter, a karate expert, a rock climber. I think having all those different interests and experiences probably is what really creates within you an artist that produces compelling work that really appeals to me. And so I appreciate you sharing that. Maybe we'll have to do this again.
Well, it's really my pleasure. My wife she says, I'm a math teacher, not an artist, but she knows a lot because I talk a lot. And I said, yeah, I'm doing this blog interview or this podcast interview. And I don't know if I'm going to be able to, keep the conversation going. She's like, oh my God. She goes, you can't, when you start talking, she goes, we can't shut you up. You'll do fine. I like talking about it.
She knows you well, huh?
Yeah.
It's like my wife knows me well, and she loves me anyway.
Yeah, and that's why I like teaching Zoom classes, because I love talking about it, and I love sharing ideas, and I love hearing people's ideas and questions. It's wonderful. So
what do you cover in your Zoom classes? Let's talk about that a little bit. I would just want to make sure that everyone knows what you have to offer out there. So,
thanks. Yeah. It's sort of based on my book is maybe based on my Zoom classes. They're 5 weeks, one meeting once a week for 5 weeks, 2-hour duration. We pick a simple object, starting with, a very simple organic object, and then moving through different kinds of surfaces. Like we'll usually do something that deals with transparency, like a bottle. Maybe we'll stick a flower or a paintbrush in it. Something made out of reflective metal, like a creamer or a little teapot or something. And we just sort of work through different problems and talk about, color mixing and sort of the ideas and perception. How does reflected light work? What's a core shadow? What are we seeing? How do we break down what we're seeing into the physical process of applying paint to a surface and mimicking what we see? And they're designed for beginning to intermediate painters.
So if someone wanted to look into that, where would they go?
The best thing to do, it's hard for me to plan my schedule far in advance. Usually a month at the most, I'll plan a class. The best way to be in touch with that is to get on my website, craigstevensart.com, join my mailing list, and I will send out an email first to the people on the mailing list. And generally 24 to 48 hours later, I'll post to my social media and advertise it. But often it fills up with just people from my mailing list, the initial mailing. So for now, my mailing list is only for advance notification of classes. But I have in the past done little one-day sales of paintings where just like everything here is half price. And I would send that out to maybe my mailing list before anyone else.
Well, I want to be sure to let everyone know I'll have the links in the show notes for this episode. If you're watching the video version, you'll see the screens here. Be sure to check out Craig's wonderful Instagram account. That's Craig Stevens, and that's STEPH, Stevens Art.
Yeah.
So be sure to look at that. And of course, I'll provide links to that as well. But Craig, what a pleasure to have you on the show. Hopefully this recording sticks and we can share
it. Just do it again if it didn't.
There we go. Well, you got plenty to say, so.
That's right.
So I enjoyed this. I enjoyed it very much. So thank you.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Carl. I really appreciate it.
I want to thank Craig Stevens for taking the time to record this edition of The Artful Painter. Now, this is not the first time that we recorded this. Shortly after the Super Bowl this year, we recorded the first interview, but sadly, for the first time in my 12 plus years of podcasting history, I lost a recording. Despite all the precautions that I took, it was gone. It disappeared. It is somewhere in an alternate universe for all I know. But anyway, it was gone, and so I had to sheepishly call Craig up and say, I lost that interview. Would you mind doing it again? Fortunately, I don't think either one of us remembered what we talked about in the first interview, so the second interview is kind of like doing the first. Now, he was kind enough to allow me to see a preview of his new book, The Beginner's Guide to Oil Painting, Simple Still Life Projects to Help You Master the Basics. There is a link in the show notes. Now, it may have the word beginner in the title, but I think this is a book for anyone, no matter how long they have been painting. You will learn something useful. You will learn a new way of thinking about certain things. And it's, I know I did. So I think you'll enjoy it. And now I want to take a moment to acknowledge the associate producers of The Artful Painter. These are people who provide financial support with their generous donations. I want to acknowledge the most recent contributor, Shireen Fancher. She wrote a very kind note, and it really put a smile on my face, and I think you'll see why as I read it. This is what she wrote. We so enjoyed your interview with our daughter, Kim Lordier. It was an hour well spent for both her father and me. You are a wonderful interviewer, and it was a pleasure to listen to you as well as Kim. Well, Shireen, thank you so much for that kind email. And you can see why it put a smile on my face. I have children, and I'm certainly proud of them. And it's clear that you and your husband are very proud of Kim, and you have every reason to be so. She's a fine painter, and she was a delight to talk to in this show. There are other ways to provide financial support to The Artful Painter. One is through the Artful Methods membership. This is like a homemade Patreon. I've had a few people ask if I could do a Patreon or at least provide a means of doing recurring donations without having to go back and doing it manually over and over again. So rather than go through Patreon, which takes a huge cut of your contribution, I decided what I would do is I would create my own homemade Patreon. So it's on my website, and I call it the Artful Methods membership. Now, to provide value back to you, in addition to the episodes from the podcast, what I'm doing is I'm uploading, as I produce them, inspiring art books that are in the public domain. And they're like a performance. It's not just a dry reading, but I try to put feeling into it. There's music. So it makes a nice ambience, if you will, to listen to while you're in your studio, while you're traveling, or whatever it is that you like to do when you listen to something like this. It's quite inspiring. The Art Spirit is the first title that I did. It's by Robert Henry. It's about 9 hours of content. The second book is Landscape Painting by Burge Harrison. That one clocks in at a little over 4.5 hours. And I also have a reenactment of James Abbott McNeill Whistler's 10 o'clock lecture. And there's more coming. Toward the end of May, I have another title that I'm working on that I will begin to publish at that time. What are people saying about Artful Methods? Well, I got this really nice email from Alan Bloom. He says, yesterday, instead of listening to John Coltrane radio on Pandora, which is my usual background painting ambience, I finally began your recording of The Art Spirit. Absolutely outstanding. I've seen other people comment that they found listening to the book or the podcast inspiring, but I was skeptical and thought it would be distracting. I'm now a believer, and I look forward to your other readings. I'll still switch on Coltrane or Lucinda Williams, but I'm glad that I found another background option. Well, thank you, Alan. I deeply appreciate this. I appreciate you purchasing the membership and listening to it. But like you, there are times where I just don't want to listen to words, the spoken word. So I want to listen to John Coltrane as well. So nice one there. I appreciate that. Now, you use a phrase in your email. You called it your usual background painting ambience. And coincidentally, just this week, I released a new product on the Artful Methods membership. It just comes with it. If you're already subscribed, you should see it there. It's called Studio Ambience, Music for Your Creative Space. The reason I created it is because I've had some write in saying they would like to have a music playlist based on the music that's found within my podcast. Well, it's not a playlist per se, but I do put together music from artists that I like, that I use in the podcast, and I've set it to video. That's how the licensing works, by the way. I get my music primarily from a source called Epidemic Sound. Fantastic source for content. So what I did is I created a video. You don't have to watch it, but what I did is I put a slideshow in each music volume that I created. Each one's a little over an hour or right at an hour. So it's about 2.5 hours that's available right now. So the first one is a slideshow of, let's see, I think it's Edgar Payne. So I did a lot of Edgar Payne paintings, put the Ken Burns move on it. So if you wanted to watch it, you could, but it's a real slow bake, okay? But it's there, and the music is in the background, so you just play it from within the membership area. And I did the same thing with some of the paintings of Frederick Remington. I have many others planned in the months ahead, but I call that Studio Ambiance, Music for Your Creative Space. And this is just one extra thing that I plan. There's many others that I plan for the Artful Methods. So I hope you enjoy that. You can find the button that takes you straight to the page that has the information about this on the homepage of The Artful Painter. I also have a link in the show notes. This brings us to the end of this edition of The Artful Painter. May your cubes be full of beautiful and light, fast colors, and your brush strokes applied with confidence. I'll see you all in the next edition of The Artful Painter.
Picture on the TV.